Y'all, I am here with President and Chief Executive Officer of the Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association, or the PPTA, Anita Brikman. Anita, hello. Welcome to the podcast.
Amy, thank you for having me. Great to be speaking with you today.
Well, tell me a little bit about the organization. What's the mission? What do y'all do?
Well, so it is a global organization. So we have got members that are active in very many different parts of the world. But basically, PPTA is a healthcare trade association that represents the manufacturers of what are called plasma-derived therapies, as well as the collectors of human plasma that is so needed to create these therapies for rare disease patients around the world. Our mission is really to raise awareness about the need for plasma donation, how it is so important for these plasma-derived therapies to increase patient access to these therapies, which can vary around the world, and to increase the availability of high-quality plasma, so much of which is needed as it goes through this manufacturing process called fractionation to create these therapies.
I think there is a subset of our listeners that could see the tie-in to hemophilia and bleeding disorders really nicely, but there might be a few that are a little bit confused about why we would have you on the show. Tell me a little bit about how bleeding disorders, hemophilia in particular, kind of factors into your work.
So we are very closely committed and tied to this community. In fact, I can say one of the first things that I did in joining PPTA was go to the Bleeding Disorders Conference here outside of Washington, D.C. One of my first things that I did, meeting so many of these patients. So these therapies I was talking about, plasma contains these very special proteins and antibodies that people who have genetic rare disorders need. Some of them are primary immune deficiencies. That is a lot of what plasma-derived therapies are used for. Others are neurological conditions. But these proteins are also valuable for coagulation factors, hemophilia A, hemophilia B, and von Willebrand disease in particular. While I understand that many in the bleeding disorders community have been able to move away from a reliance on plasma-derived therapies, that is not the case in many parts of the world, in lesser developed nations. And it certainly is very clear to me that von Willebrand disease patients do rely on plasma-derived therapies. So we have had a long history with the bleeding disorders community that I am very committed to continuing.
This might be the majority of your job, but how committed and what is the daily interaction with maybe regulatory agencies here in the States and globally about blood safety and the plasma in general in terms of like blood-borne diseases like HIV?
Absolutely. And of course, that has been such a concern, as we know, with the tragic history for the bleeding disorders community. Some of the issues that evolved from the AIDS epidemic and the devastating impact on the bleeding disorders community led to the formation of PPTA. It also informed the standards that we uphold. PPTA administers standards and programs that go above and beyond what regulators require to have the utmost quality and safety for the plasma donation process and the manufacturing process that can now remove these blood-borne viruses tremendously effectively. It has been decades since there has been a transmission, but those standards and getting the industry to that place have been part of that journey. And that is why we have listened to and been partnering with the blood disorders community now for years. We have regular interactions with the Food and Drug Administration, with the European the European Medicines Agency in the EU, where safety and quality are always paramount. In addition, we actually advocate with our patient organization partners on Capitol Hill and in the States as far as access to therapies and the unique nature of plasma-derived therapies and how they're different than other pharmaceuticals. Human plasma, it's a finite resource. Plasma cannot be manufactured in a lab. So we rely on plasma donation, which is so important and vital here in the United States for the creation of these therapies. But if our regulators, if our lawmakers don't understand that unique nature of this sector, it can eventually be a detriment to patients.
Anita, tell me about some other disorders, diseases that utilize plasma-derived products.
So I mentioned primary immune deficiency, and there are many primary immune deficiencies. And these are children who are born with a very compromised or non-functioning immune system. So without plasma-derived therapies, the immunoglobulins that come out through the fractionation process, they get one infection after another, and it can be completely debilitating to their lives. There are other liver or lung diseases. I'm thinking of alpha-1, another genetically inherited issue where without the plasma-derived therapies, there can be a deterioration. And we're not just talking about life-saving here. We're talking about life-improving in so many ways. The other thing is that there are many other indications for plasma-derived therapies that people know less about. There's a growing area of what's called secondary immune deficiency. So if you're going through cancer treatment, obviously the treatments to fight the cancer are devastating to the immune system. So plasma-derived therapies can help bolster that for the cancer patient. Plasma-derived therapies are also used in shock trauma to treat burn victims, rabies, tetanus. There are so many different uses. And there is even a type of therapy for a blood incompatibility, Rh incompatibility between a mother and her unborn child, where the antibodies in the mother's blood recognize that of the unborn baby or fetus as foreign and can start attacking. But with one injection, this one anti-D injection, that cascading process can be stopped, and the baby has a much better chance of being born healthy. So while many of the uses of plasma-derived therapies are for rare conditions, when you look at it holistically, we're talking about a lot of people who rely on them.
Anita, we love executives on this show, and I do have to say, we love a lady executive on this show, lady to lady.
Hello.
So tell our listeners a little bit about you. How'd you get into this?
So I have a long history in healthcare, but it's kind of a unique history, I would say. I actually penned an article a few weeks ago called From the Newsroom to the Boardroom, because where I started was actually as a healthcare journalist for many years, really focused on medical breakthroughs, a lot of work with rare disease patients, the need for orphan drug promotion, all those kinds of things. I worked in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C. as a medical journalist. But at one juncture in my career, I realized I wanted to do more than report on the breakthroughs, but be part of mission-driven organizations that help advance patient care and also self-care, knowledge around healthcare, ownership of one's healthcare decisions, which I can imagine many of your listeners facing with, whether it's insurance issues and going through the red tape of getting treatments approved, all those kinds of things. It can be a very complex place. And I think an informed medical consumer is so important. But once I left journalism, I joined two different healthcare associations. The first one in hospice and palliative care. So very much focused on end-of-life care and how to make it more accessible and acceptable to patients and their families to transition at the end of life.
Right.
My second healthcare association was focused on non-prescription medicines and dietary supplements, all those things you find in the drugstore when you walk in. So self-care focus. So less of a focus on a patient, but on a consumer. But I will say, as I enjoyed my time at that association very much, I missed the direct-to-patient connection that I had previously had with the hospice organization. PPTA is wonderfully unique in that one of the first things the board of directors told me when I was hired is that one of your jobs, day one, is to make important, lasting, and authentic relationships with our patient organizations. They are the ones who matter. They are why we are here. You are with us every time we go on Capitol Hill. Your stories are in all of our publicity on media. It is focused on the patients who need these therapies, because there is no stronger message than that. And I am thrilled to be leading this organization that has these ties to patients, not just here in the United States, but on the international level. I was just at the International Plus Conference of patient organizations with hemophilia patients front and center represented there, and PPTAs at the table as well. And I couldn't be more proud of that.
Oh my gosh. As like a nonprofit nerd, that just like makes my heart soar. That's so great. That kind of leads me.
I'm a fellow nonprofit nerd.
Yes. We love. This has just been lovely and really informative, and I'm very excited, hopefully maybe to have you back on the show so we can learn a little bit more about the partnerships that you're making, kind of where the organization is going. To final question, like the biggest question we ask, what are the priorities of the organization this year and kind of in the next 3 as you're kind of looking towards your strategic plans and things?
Absolutely. So we really work around 3 pillars. One is education and awareness. Plasma donation is nowhere nearly as well recognized as blood donation. And we need more people to consider donating plasma. It takes 1,200 donations of plasma to treat one hemophilia patient for a year. Because through this fractionation process, you need so much of this plasma pooled together to distill those critical proteins and antibodies we talked about. So it's education awareness about what is plasma donation, why is it so important, who's waiting on the other end, those patients who need these plasma-derived therapies. We also want to increase availability of access to the plasma that we need, both here in the U.S., in Europe, and around the world. And, we want to increase patient access to plasma therapies. That's what we advocate for. And that these are unique therapies. They're not necessarily interchangeable, and they're different from other pharmaceuticals, and that they need to be looked at differently by regulators and lawmakers. So those are our key priorities. But it continually goes back to what I see is what's new in the PPTA logo, which is the P and the D. It's the connection between the patient and the donor, and that interconnection of one person's gift leading to a better life for another person. I think that's at the core of what we're about at PPTA, and I hope we can continue to do more with the bleeding disorders community and our other patient groups as we do even greater things together.
Oh, Anita, that's great. Will we see you at the Bleeding Disorders Conference this year, or do you have other travel plans?
Of course.
Yes!
I will be there, and I look forward to meeting you and some of your listeners, and
really just thrilled to be on the show today. And I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. Right back at you. Thank you, Anita, and we'll talk to you soon.